My name is Natalie, and I'm 32. 3 hours ago, my sister-in-law looked my 7-year-old daughter straight in the eye and told her she didn't belong in our family because she doesn't share our blood. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my husband did something that changed everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story starts way before tonight's dinner disaster. It starts with loss, love, and a little girl who became the center of my world when I thought my world had ended. 5 years ago, I was 27 and planning a wedding that would never happen. David and I had been together since college, one of those steady relationships that everyone assumed would lead to marriage and white picket fences. We just moved in together, and I was secretly hoping he'd propose soon. Then I found out I was pregnant. I remember staring at that positive test in our tiny bathroom, hands shaking with excitement and terror. When David came home from his construction job that evening, covered in sawdust and smiling, I practically bounced off the couch. "I have news," I said, barely able to contain myself. His face lit up. "Good news or bad news?" "Depends on your perspective," I said, handing him the test. The smile never left his face, just grew bigger. He picked me up and spun me around our cramped living room, both of us laughing like kids. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, like he couldn't believe it. "We're really having a baby." 3 weeks later, David was driving to the hardware store to buy paint for the nursery we'd started planning. The semi-truck ran a red light at 60 miles per hour. The police officer who came to my door said he died instantly. He never knew what hit him. Small mercy, I guess. But it also meant he never knew that our baby would have his dark hair and his stubborn chin. He never knew she'd laugh the way he did, with her whole body. Grief during pregnancy is its own special kind of hell. You're growing life while processing death. Your body is changing, preparing for joy while your heart is breaking. I went to every prenatal appointment alone, watching other couples hold hands during ultrasounds while I gripped the armrest of the examination table by myself. My mom tried to help, but she lived 8 hours away and had her own health issues. David's parents blamed me somehow, as if my pregnancy had distracted him into that intersection. They wanted nothing to do with me or their grandchild. Fair enough. I stopped trying to include them after they hung up on me when I called to tell them Emily had been born. Emily. I named her after David's grandmother, the one person in his family who'd ever shown me genuine kindness. She would have loved this little girl with the bright eyes and easy smile. Those first months were brutal. You don't realize how many simple tasks require two people until you're doing everything alone. Holding a screaming baby while trying to sterilize bottles, grocery shopping with a car seat that weighs more than the baby, trying to work while she napped, hoping she'd stay asleep long enough for you to finish one assignment. But Emily and I figured it out together. We had our routines, our little jokes, our quiet moments when it was just us against the world. I worked freelance marketing from home, which paid the bills but didn't offer much social interaction. Most days, Emily was the only person I talked to, and she wasn't exactly conversational yet. When Emily turned 1, I decided we needed more people in our lives. Not romance, I wasn't ready for that yet, but friendship, community, something beyond the four walls of our apartment. I started taking her to the park regularly, hoping to meet other parents. That's where I met Sarah, a single mom with a son Emily's age. We bonded over the shared exhaustion of solo parenting. "You should come to the community center," Sarah told me one afternoon while our kids played in the sandbox. "They have a young parent support group. Nothing heavy, just coffee and conversation while the kids play." The community center looked like every community center ever built. Fluorescent lights, motivational posters, that smell of floor cleaner and hope. The support group met in a room with a circle of mismatched chairs and a corner full of toys that had seen better days. That's where I first saw Caleb. He was sitting across the circle, bouncing a toddler on his knee, while listening to another parent talk about potty training disasters. The little boy had Caleb's sandy hair and the same green eyes, but something about their interaction seemed different from the other parent-child pairs in the room. After the meeting, I was wrestling Emily into her jacket when the little boy toddled over and handed her a toy truck. Emily, who was going through a phase where she rejected most social overtures, actually smiled and said, "Thank you," in her clearest voice yet. "That's progress," Caleb said, approaching with that easy smile. Mason's usually pretty possessive of his trucks. Emily's usually pretty suspicious of new people, I admitted. Good instincts, actually. We stood there watching our kids interact with the careful attention of parents who've learned that playground dynamics can shift from peaceful to chaotic in seconds. Mason was chattering at Emily in that earnest way toddlers have. pointing at different toys and apparently explaining their various functions. "Your son's quite the salesman," I said. "My nephew, actually," Caleb corrected. "I'm watching him while my sister works. Been our routine for about 6 months now." I looked at him more closely. Mid-30s, laugh lines around those green eyes, wearing a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days but was clean. There was something solid about him, steady in a way that reminded me of David, but without the painful comparison that usually accompanied such thoughts. "That's really nice of you," I said. "Not everyone would take on that kind of responsibility." He shrugged. "Mason's easy. Besides, my sister needed help, and I needed something to do with my afternoons. Win-win." We ended up walking to the parking lot together, both of us moving at the glacial pace required when herding 1-year-olds. Emily had apparently decided Mason was acceptable company and kept looking back to make sure he was still following us. "Same time next week?" Caleb asked as we reached my car. "Probably," I said, then added with more certainty. "Yes, definitely." He grinned. "Good. Mason will be disappointed if Emily doesn't show up. He's already planning what toys to bring her." I drove home with Emily babbling in her car seat, occasionally saying Mason with the same tone she usually reserved for cookie or playground. It had been a good day. Normal, even. I'd forgotten how nice normal could feel. The next week, I found myself choosing my outfit more carefully than usual. Nothing dramatic. Just clean jeans instead of the paint-splattered ones, a shirt that didn't have mystery stains on the shoulder. You know, the basic maintenance that had become optional when your primary companion was a toddler. Caleb was already there when we arrived, Mason playing with blocks in the corner. He waved us over and I noticed he'd made the same wardrobe upgrade I had. "Emily!" Mason called out, holding up a block like it was the most exciting thing in the world. We fell into an easy routine over the following weeks. The support group became less about parenting advice and more about the comfortable conversation that happened before and after meetings. Caleb would save us seats. I'd bring extra snacks that Emily would inevitably share with Mason. I learned that he was a contractor who specialized in kitchen renovations, that he'd moved back to town 3 years ago to help with his aging parents, that his sister Jessica was working 2 jobs to finish nursing school. He learned that I'd been on my own with Emily since she was born, that I worked in marketing, that I missed having grown-up conversations. "You're good with her," he said one afternoon, watching me negotiate a toy dispute between Emily and another child with diplomatic precision. "Patient but firm. That's not easy to balance. Some days I feel like I'm winging it completely," I admitted. "Like there should be a manual for this, and I missed the day they handed them out." "If there was a manual, half the stuff wouldn't apply anyway," he said. "Kids don't read instructions." I laughed and realized it was the first time I'd laughed about parenting stress instead of just enduring it. Something about his perspective made the daily challenges feel manageable instead of overwhelming. After 6 weeks of group meetings, Caleb asked if Emily and I wanted to join him and Mason for lunch after the next session. "Nothing fancy," he said quickly. "There's a diner down the street with a kids' menu and crayons. Mason loves their grilled cheese." I said yes before I could overthink it. Emily loved grilled cheese too. The diner was exactly as advertised. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated since 1985, and crayons that had been used by approximately 3,000 previous children. Emily and Mason immediately claimed a box of crayons and began creating what I generously called abstract art on their paper placemats. "This is nice," I said, meaning it. "Yeah, it is." Caleb looked around the diner with satisfaction. "I used to come here with my dad when I was Mason's age. Same booth, actually. Some things never change. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, the weather, funny things our kids had said, places we'd traveled or wanted to travel. Easy conversation that flowed without effort, punctuated by the occasional need to prevent Emily from eating her crayons or help Mason reach his milk. When Emily started getting fussy, signaling the approach of nap time, I began gathering our things. "Same time next week?" Caleb asked, echoing the question that had become our weekly ritual. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with my boldness, "would you and Mason want to come to the park near my apartment Saturday morning? Emily loves the swings there." His smile was worth the risk. "We'd love that." As I buckled Emily into her car seat, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just looking forward to next week's support group meeting. I was looking forward to Saturday, to spending time with Caleb that had nothing to do with parenting advice or community center coffee. For the first time since David died, I was interested in someone. Not just grateful for adult conversation or appreciative of help with Emily, but genuinely interested in getting to know someone better. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it felt like hope. Saturday morning came with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes you want to spend all day outside. Emily woke up in an unusually good mood, chattering about Mason play, while I changed her diaper and dressed her in the little overalls she loved because they had pockets. The park was only a 10-minute walk from our apartment, but I'd been there enough times to know which playground equipment was age-appropriate and which would result in scraped knees or worse. Emily made a beeline for the swings the moment she spotted them, as predictable as sunrise. Caleb and Mason arrived 5 minutes after we did, Mason immediately running toward Emily with the focused determination toddlers bring to important social missions. Caleb carried a thermos and wore a jacket that brought out the green in his eyes. Not that I was noticing such things. "Coffee?" he offered, holding up the thermos. I figured public park benches and caffeine go hand in hand. "You're officially my favorite person," I said, accepting the cup he poured. The coffee was perfect, strong enough to actually help, not too hot to drink immediately. We settled onto a bench with clear sightlines to both kids, who had found a patch of fallen leaves and were conducting some kind of experiment involving throwing them as high as possible and giggling when they fluttered down. "This is their idea of science," I observed. "Important research," Caleb agreed seriously. "Gravity testing requires rigorous methodology." I snorted, coffee nearly coming out my nose. "You did not just make a physics joke while watching toddlers play in leaves." "I absolutely did, and I'm not sorry." Something about his grin made my stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. When was the last time someone had made me laugh like that? When was the last time I'd felt attractive, interesting, worth flirting with? "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with kids," I said impulsively. He considered this seriously, as if it were a complex philosophical question. "I build furniture in my garage, not professionally, just for fun, I guess. Chairs, mostly. Sometimes tables. That's unexpectedly impressive. What's unexpected about it?" I gestured vaguely at his general appearance. "You look like someone who builds furniture, all competent and practical." "I meant it's impressive that you do it for fun, not just because you have to fix something. What do you do for fun that has nothing to do with kids?" I opened my mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "I watch Netflix after Emily goes to bed, read marketing blogs. God, that's depressing. I used to have hobbies." "What kind of hobbies?" "Photography. I was actually pretty good at it in college. Had all this equipment, spent weekends driving around looking for interesting shots. Now I only take pictures of Emily, and they're all blurry because she won't sit still." Caleb studied my face with the kind of attention that made me self-conscious in the best way. "What stopped you?" "Life, I guess. Hard to pursue artistic vision when you're covered in baby spit and running on 3 hours of sleep. Emily's not a baby anymore." He was right, and I realized I'd been using her infancy as an excuse long after she'd outgrown the stage that made photography impossible. Fear, maybe. Fear that I wasn't as good as I remembered, or that the person who'd loved taking pictures had disappeared along with everything else in my old life. "Maybe I should try again," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "You should. I'd like to see your work sometime." Emily chose that moment to present us with a leaf collection, each specimen carefully selected for maximum crunchiness. She climbed onto my lap and began showing me the unique qualities of each leaf with the seriousness of a museum curator. "This one yellow," she announced, holding up a maple leaf that was more brown than yellow but close enough for a 2-year-old. "Beautiful," I agreed. "What about this one?" We spent 20 minutes cataloging leaves while Mason showed Caleb his rock collection, which apparently had very specific organizational principles that only made sense to a toddler mind. "We should probably head home soon," I said eventually, noting the signs of impending meltdown in Emily's increasing fussiness. "Nap time approaches." "This was really nice," Caleb said, helping gather scattered toys. "We should do it again. Would you like to come for dinner sometime this week?" The invitation slipped out before I could second-guess myself. Nothing fancy. Probably pasta and whatever vegetables Emily will actually eat, but I'd love that. His immediate acceptance caught me off guard. I'd been prepared for polite deflection or the need to convince him that dinner with a toddler could actually be enjoyable. "Wednesday?" I suggested. "Around 6? "Perfect. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And Mason, obviously, if Jessica doesn't mind." As we walked back to the parking area, Emily holding my hand and chattering about her leaf collection, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not the practical anticipation of checking items off a to-do list or getting through another day, but the warm, fluttery anticipation of looking forward to something purely because it would be enjoyable. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. When it did arrive, I spent more time preparing than I'd spent on anything in months. Not just cooking, though I did make an actual meal instead of my usual rotation of kid-friendly convenience foods, but cleaning, setting the table with plates that matched, even putting flowers in a vase. Emily helped by organizing her toy box, which mostly involved taking everything out and putting it back in a different order. But she was excited about Mason coming dinner and kept asking when he would arrive. Caleb knocked on our door at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a shirt I suspected was reserved for special occasions. Mason had a small backpack that I assumed contained emergency entertainment supplies, the kind of preparation that marked an experienced caregiver. "Something smells incredible," Caleb said, following me into the kitchen. "Garlic bread and optimism," I said. The pasta's still cooking, but Emily insisted on taste testing the sauce approximately 14 times, so I'm confident it meets toddler approval standards. Dinner was surprisingly smooth, as Emily and Mason entertained each other with a complex game involving passing crayons back and forth while making increasingly elaborate sound effects. The adults managed to have actual conversation between referee duties. "This is really good," Caleb said, twirling pasta around his fork with the practiced motion of someone who'd eaten plenty of meals while managing a small child. "When you said nothing fancy, I was expecting hot dogs." "I save hot dogs for special occasions," I said dryly, "like when I've completely given up on life." He laughed, and I felt that flutter again. When was the last time I'd made someone laugh on purpose? When was the last time I'd wanted to? After dinner, we moved to the living room while the kids played with Emily's toys. Caleb helped clean up without being asked, navigating my kitchen like he'd been there before. "Easy, comfortable, natural. Thank you for this," he said as we finished loading the dishwasher. "For inviting us. Mason doesn't get a lot of normal family experiences." "What do you mean?" His expression grew more serious. "Jessica's doing her best, but working 2 jobs and school doesn't leave much time for dinner parties. Mason spends most evenings with babysitters or at daycare. This kind of thing. Sitting around a table, adults talking while kids play nearby. It's good for him." I looked at Emily and Mason, who had discovered the magic of building block towers specifically for the purpose of knocking them down. "It's good for Emily, too. And for me, if I'm being honest." "Lonely?" he asked gently. "Sometimes. More than sometimes, actually. You don't realize how much adult conversation you need until you're not getting any." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching our kids destroy and rebuild their architectural creations with the dedication of tiny demolition experts. "Natalie," Caleb said, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. "Would you like to go out sometime? Just the 2 of us?" My heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Are you asking me on a date?" "I'm definitely asking you on a date." I looked at Emily, who was showing Mason how to make his blocks into a bridge, completely absorbed in her engineering project. "When was the last time I'd been on a date? When was the last time I'd wanted to be on a date?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." His smile was so bright I had to resist the urge to shield my eyes. "Saturday night? I know a place." Our first official date was at a little Italian restaurant downtown that had exactly the right balance of grown-up atmosphere and understanding that not everyone eating there was necessarily a sophisticated diner. Caleb wore a navy button-down that made his eyes even more green, and I wore the one dress I owned that hadn't been compromised by toddler-related stains. We talked for 3 hours. 3 actual hours of uninterrupted adult conversation, covering everything from travel dreams to childhood embarrassments, to the books we'd loved and lost track of in the chaos of daily life. When the waiter finally approached with the check, I was surprised the restaurant was still serving dinner. It felt like we'd just arrived. "I should get home," I said reluctantly, glancing at my watch. Emily was with Sarah for the evening, but I didn't want to push my luck with the babysitting arrangement. "Of course," Caleb said, standing to help with my coat in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and thoughtful. Though I have to admit, I'm not ready for this to end. Me neither. In the parking lot, he walked me to my car, hands in his pockets like a teenager on his first date. The comparison wasn't entirely inaccurate. I felt like a teenager myself, nervous and excited and completely out of practice with the delicate dance of new romance. "I had a really good time," I said, fumbling with my keys. "Good enough to do it again?" "Definitely." He leaned down and kissed me, soft and brief and perfect. When he pulled back, his smile was gentle. "I'll call you tomorrow? You better." I drove home with the radio turned up and the windows cracked, feeling more like myself than I had in years. Not the exhausted single mother version of myself, not the grieving widow version, just Natalie. The person I'd been before life got complicated, plus some hard-earned wisdom and a lot more appreciation for simple pleasures. The second date was a picnic in the park with Emily and Mason, because finding childcare for 2 single parents required the kind of advanced planning usually reserved for military operations. The third date was coffee after the support group meeting, which had evolved from parenting resource to excuse to see each other weekly. By the fourth date, Emily was asking when Caleb and Mason were coming over again, and I realized we'd moved beyond casual dating into something that resembled a relationship. The thought should have terrified me. It had been 3 years since David died, and I hadn't so much as looked at another man with interest. Instead, it felt right in a way I hadn't expected. 6 months later, Caleb asked if he could keep a change of clothes at my apartment. For practical reasons, he explained, though his grin suggested the reasons weren't entirely practical. In case I get called to an emergency project and need clean clothes. Emergency kitchen renovation? I asked skeptically. You never know when someone might have a cabinet crisis. I cleared out a drawer for him that same evening. A year later, he brought up the possibility of moving in together. We were making breakfast in my kitchen. Well, he was making breakfast while I attempted to convince Emily that fruit was an acceptable breakfast food and not a personal attack on her freedom, when he mentioned that his lease was up for renewal. I could find a bigger place, he said casually, flipping pancakes with the kind of competence that never stopped impressing me. 2 bedrooms? Maybe 3. Room for Emily to have her own space. Mason to visit whenever Jessica needs help. Emily looked up from her systematic destruction of a banana. Caleb live here? Would you like that? I asked her. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to all major decisions. Caleb make good breakfast. That's true, I agreed. He does make good breakfast. And Mason come too? Sometimes, Caleb said, when he needs a place to stay. Okay, Emily declared, returning to her banana with the matter settled. I looked at Caleb, who was watching me with the careful expression of someone trying not to look too hopeful. Are you sure you want to sign up for the chaos? I've been living in the chaos for over a year, he pointed out. I'm pretty sure I can handle making it official. We found a 3-bedroom house with a big kitchen and a backyard perfect for Emily's endless energy. Moving day was controlled chaos, with Jessica and Sarah helping wrangle kids and boxes, while Caleb and I attempted to create some kind of organizational system that would allow us to find basic necessities like coffee and Emily's favorite stuffed animal. This feels very domestic, Jessica observed, watching Caleb hang Emily's artwork on the refrigerator with the same care he'd give a museum piece. It is domestic, I said. Terrifyingly domestic. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? I watched Emily show Mason where she'd decided his toys should live when he visited, and Caleb explaining the new coffee maker to me with the patience of someone who understood that caffeine was essential to my morning functionality. Good terrifying, I said. Definitely good terrifying. By the time Emily turned 4, our household had found its rhythm. Caleb left for work early, I worked from the home office we'd set up in the 3rd bedroom, and Emily attended preschool 3 days a week. Evenings were dinner together, bedtime stories that both adults were allowed to read, and the comfortable chaos of a family that had chosen each other. It was Jessica who first brought up the subject of marriage, during one of our monthly coffee dates while the kids played at the indoor playground. So when's the wedding? She asked without preamble, stirring sugar into her latte with the casual air of someone discussing weekend plans. What wedding? Yours and Caleb's. You've been living together for almost 2 years. Emily calls him Dad half the time. You guys act like you've been married for decades. I figured you were just waiting for the right moment to make it official. I hadn't thought about marriage, which was strange considering how naturally our relationship had evolved. We'd moved through every other milestone without formal discussion. Dating, meeting each other's important people, moving in together, becoming a family unit. Marriage felt like the logical next step, but it also felt like something that required actual conversation rather than assumed progression. Has he mentioned it to you? Jessica grinned. He's been shopping for rings for 3 months. Apparently he wants something that matches your practical personality, but isn't so practical it looks like a business transaction. My heart did something complicated. He's been ring shopping? Did I spoil the surprise? He's going to kill me. No, you didn't spoil anything. I hadn't thought about it. But you want to marry him? It wasn't a question, but I considered it anyway. Did I want to marry Caleb? The answer came easily, without doubt or hesitation. Yes, I said. I really do. 2 months later, Caleb proposed during Emily's bedtime story, because apparently he knew me well enough to understand that I'd want our daughter to be part of the moment, rather than excluded from it. He'd chosen a simple solitaire that was exactly what I would have picked for myself, if I'd ever allowed myself to think about such things. Will you marry us? He asked Emily, who was sitting between us on her bed, clutching her stuffed elephant. Both? She asked, looking back and forth between us. Both, he confirmed. We're a package deal. Emily considered this with her usual seriousness. Do I get to wear a pretty dress? The prettiest dress we can find, I promised. Then okay, she declared. We get married. That night, after Emily was asleep and we'd called everyone with our news, Caleb and I sat in our kitchen planning a wedding that would be small, simple, and everything we wanted. Are you nervous about meeting my family? He asked, tracing patterns on the back of my hand. I hadn't thought much about his family beyond knowing they existed. His parents lived about 4 hours away, and he had a sister named Rachel who lived in another state. We'd talked to them on the phone a few times, but our relationship had developed in the insular bubble of daily life. Work, Emily, our small circle of friends. Should I be nervous? They're traditional, he said carefully. Small town, family values, that kind of thing. They might need time to adjust to the idea of Emily. What do you mean? Caleb's expression grew uncomfortable. They know you have a daughter, obviously, and they know her father died before she was born. It might take them a while to understand that she's not just your daughter, she's ours. Something cold settled in my stomach. They have a problem with Emily? Not a problem exactly. They're just not used to non-traditional family situations. Once they meet her, once they see how amazing she is, they'll come around. I wanted to believe him. More than that, I needed to believe him, because the alternative, that the people who'd raised the man I loved might not accept the child I'd die for, was unthinkable. When do I meet them? The wedding, he said. They're driving down the morning of the ceremony. Looking back, that should have been my first warning sign. What kind of family doesn't meet their son's fiancée until the day she becomes their daughter-in-law? But I was focused on dress fittings and guest lists and the 100 small details that go into planning even a simple wedding. I should have paid more attention to the things Caleb wasn't saying. Our wedding was perfect in the way small, intimate gatherings can be when everyone present actually wants to be there. We held the ceremony in the community center where we'd first met, with folding chairs arranged in a semicircle and flowers from Jessica's garden decorating the space. Emily wore a pale yellow dress with a sash she could tie herself and carried a basket of flower petals that she distributed with the serious concentration of someone fulfilling an important duty. Sarah served as my maid of honor, Jessica stood up for Caleb, and Mason served as ring bearer with the kind of focus that made everyone hold their breath until the rings were safely delivered. Caleb's family arrived that morning exactly as he'd predicted. His parents, Robert and Patricia, were the kind of couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Pressed clothes, matching smiles, the sort of wholesome appearance that made you think of church potlucks and well-tended gardens. His sister Rachel was harder to read. She was younger than Caleb, maybe early 30s, with the same green eyes but a guarded expression that never quite relaxed into genuine warmth. She brought her 2 children, twins about 6 years old, who were polite and well-behaved in a way that suggested extensive coaching about proper behavior at grown-up events. "You must be Natalie," Patricia said when Caleb introduced us, her smile bright and practiced. "We're so excited to finally meet you." "And this is Emily," I said, guiding my daughter forward with a gentle hand on her shoulder. Emily, who'd been coached about meeting new people, stepped forward and offered her hand for shaking, just like we'd practiced. "Nice to meet you," she said clearly. Patricia shook Emily's hand with the same enthusiasm she'd shown when meeting me, but I caught the quick glance she exchanged with Robert. Something passed between them. Too brief for me to interpret, but too obvious to ignore. "She's lovely," Patricia said, and I couldn't tell if the slight emphasis on she's was intentional or if I was being oversensitive. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Caleb's vows made me cry. Emily performed her flower girl duties flawlessly, and our small group of friends and family laughed and applauded in all the right places. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Emily cheered loudly enough to make everyone laugh again. During the reception, cake and champagne in the same community center, with music from someone's iPhone playlist, I watched Caleb's family interact with our friends and felt the first real stirring of unease. They were polite. Scrupulously, carefully, obviously polite. They asked appropriate questions, made appropriate comments, smiled at appropriate moments. But there was something performative about their behavior, as if they were playing the role of welcoming family members rather than actually being welcoming. Rachel's children sat quietly at their assigned table, eating cake with perfect manners while Emily and Mason ran around with the kind of joyful energy you'd expect from kids at a party. When Emily approached their table to show them her flower basket, they looked to their mother for permission before responding. "They're very well behaved," I said to Rachel, trying to make conversation. "We believe in structure," she replied, watching Emily demonstrate her flower-throwing technique to anyone who would pay attention. "Children need clear boundaries." Something in her tone suggested this was a pointed observation rather than casual conversation, But before I could respond, Caleb appeared at my elbow with champagne and the kind of smile that made my concerns feel petty and unimportant. "Having a good time?" he asked, slipping his arm around my waist. "The best time?" I said, meaning it. Whatever reservations I had about his family could wait. This was our day, our beginning, our celebration. After the reception, Caleb's family returned to their hotel while we went home to our house. Emily exhausted and happy, Caleb and I giddy with the reality of being officially married. We tucked Emily into bed together, both of us still in our wedding clothes, and she fell asleep before we finished reading her story. "So," Caleb said as we finally changed out of our formal wear, "how was that? Not too overwhelming?" "It was perfect," I said, hanging my dress carefully in our closet. "Your family seems nice." "They'll warm up," he said quickly. "They just need time to get used to the idea of Emily. They're not used to kids, really. Rachel's twins are so quiet you forget they're there." I thought about Emily's exuberant joy, her fearless approach to meeting new people, the way she'd insisted on showing everyone her flower basket. There was nothing wrong with quiet children, but there was nothing wrong with enthusiastic children either. Emily was perfectly well behaved, I said, perhaps more defensively than necessary. Of course she was. She was amazing. They'll see that once they get to know her better. I wanted to ask when that would happen, given that they lived 4 hours away and hadn't made any effort to visit during our 2-year relationship. But it was our wedding night, and I didn't want to start our marriage with an argument about his family's acceptance of mine. 6 months later, Caleb brought up the subject of adoption. We were cleaning up after dinner, Emily playing in the living room within sight of the kitchen, when he mentioned seeing a family law attorney about making things official. "What things?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew. "Emily," he said, setting down the dish he'd been drying. "I want to adopt her. Legally, I mean. So she's officially mine, not just practically." My hands stilled in the soapy water. "She already is yours." "I know, but I want it to be legal. I want to be her father on paper, not just in practice." I looked at Emily, who was building an elaborate tower out of blocks while carrying on a complex conversation with her stuffed elephant. She'd been calling Caleb Dad for months, and he'd been introducing himself as her father to teachers, doctors, anyone who needed to know about our family structure. "What would that involve?" "Paperwork, mostly. A court hearing where a judge makes it official. It's pretty straightforward when the biological father is deceased and there's no opposition." The biological father. David. I tried to remember the last time I'd thought about him in concrete terms rather than as the abstract source of Emily's dark hair and stubborn chin. Time had softened the sharp edges of grief, leaving behind a gentle sadness and gratitude for the gift he'd unknowingly given me. "I think he would have wanted that," I said quietly. "David, I mean. He would have wanted Emily to have a father who chose to be her father?" Caleb's smile was soft. "So, you're okay with it? More than okay?" "I think it's perfect." But as he pulled me into a hug, I thought about something he'd mentioned earlier, making things official. There was something about the phrase that implied our family had been unofficial until now. Temporary, subject to change. The adoption would make it legal, permanent, real in a way that apparently it hadn't been before. "There's one thing," I said, pulling back to look at him. "I want to tell her about David someday, when she's old enough to understand. I don't want her to find out accidentally that you're not her biological father." Caleb's expression grew serious. "Of course. When she's ready, we'll tell her together. Maybe when she's a teenager, old enough to process that kind of information. With a counselor," I added. "I want to do it right. Make sure she knows it doesn't change anything about our family." "Absolutely. Whatever you think is best." The adoption process was surprisingly simple. Forms to fill out, a background check, a court date where Emily wore her favorite dress, and charmed the judge by asking if she could sit in the big chair. When it was over, we had new documents that listed Caleb as Emily's father, and Emily had a new last name that matched ours. "Am I different now?" Emily asked as we left the courthouse. "No," Caleb said, lifting her into his arms. "Now it's just official that you're my daughter, but you've been my daughter since the day I met you." "Good," Emily said with satisfaction. "I like being your daughter." That evening, we celebrated with Emily's favorite dinner and a cake that said Happy Adoption Day in purple frosting. It felt like the completion of something we'd been building for 3 years. Not just a relationship, but a family. I put the adoption certificate in our safe deposit box next to our marriage license and Emily's birth certificate. Legal documents that told the story of how our family had been created through choice and commitment rather than just biology. For 2 years, that felt like enough. But families are complicated things, And sometimes the people who should support them the most are the ones who find ways to tear them apart. I learned that lesson during one terrible dinner when Emily was 7 years old and finally old enough, according to someone who wasn't her parent, to learn some hard truths about where she belonged. The lesson came from the last person I would have expected, and it changed everything about how I understood the family we'd built and the people we'd let into it. Emily had just turned 7 when Patricia called to say she and Rachel needed to come to town for some medical appointments. Rachel had been having headaches that required tests from specialists, and our city had the best neurology clinic in the region. "We were hoping we could stay with you for a few days," Patricia said, her voice carrying that careful pleasantness that meant she'd rehearsed this conversation. "The hotel rates downtown are just outrageous, and it would be so nice to spend some real time with the family." I looked at Caleb, who was nodding encouragingly. His relationship with his family had always been dutiful rather than warm, but he maintained regular phone calls and remembered birthdays with the consistency of someone who understood family obligations. "Of course," I said, though something in my stomach tightened. "How long were you thinking?" "Just a few days. Rachel's appointments are Tuesday through Thursday, so we'd arrive Monday evening and leave Friday morning, if that works for you." It was Wednesday when Patricia called, giving us 5 days to prepare for house guests. 5 days to clean the guest room, stock the refrigerator with foods that might appeal to people whose dietary preferences I didn't know, and brief Emily on the importance of being on her best behavior for Grandma Pat and Aunt Rachel. "Why do I need to be extra good?" Emily asked while helping me change the sheets on the guest bed. "Not extra good," I corrected. "Just your regular good self. Sometimes when people don't see you very often, they forget how wonderful you are." Emily considered this with the seriousness she brought to most adult concepts she didn't quite understand. "Are they nice?" "They're family," I said, which wasn't exactly an answer, but was the best I could offer. Monday evening arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of autumn weather that made everyone want to stay inside. Patricia and Rachel arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying matching luggage and the kind of forced smiles that suggested they were already tired from traveling. "The house looks lovely," Patricia said, accepting the obligatory tour with polite enthusiasm. "You've done such nice work with the decorating." Our decorating consisted mainly of Emily's artwork covering the refrigerator, family photos clustered on shelves, and furniture that prioritized comfort over style. But Patricia admired everything with the determined positivity of someone committed to finding nice things to say. Emily hung back during the tour, unusually shy in the presence of these relatives she barely knew. When Patricia complimented her latest school picture, Emily offered a small smile and said, "Thank you," in her most polite voice. "She's gotten so big," Rachel observed, studying Emily with the kind of attention that made my daughter squirm. "Kids do that," I said lightly. "Emily, why don't you show Aunt Rachel your art supplies? She might want to see the picture you drew of our family." Emily brightened at the mention of her art project, a crayon masterpiece featuring stick figures of the 3 of us standing in front of our house. She'd spent considerable time on the details: flowers in the yard, smoke curling from the chimney, everyone holding hands and smiling. "That's very nice, dear," Rachel said, examining the drawing with polite interest. "You're quite artistic." Something in her tone suggested artistic was not necessarily a compliment in her worldview, but Emily beamed with pride anyway. Dinner that first night was careful conversation, and the kind of meal I'd planned to appeal to conservative tastes. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Safe, traditional, the sort of food that wouldn't offend anyone or generate commentary about Emily's eating habits. "This is delicious," Patricia said. "It's so nice to have a home-cooked meal. We eat out far too often." "Natalie's a great cook," Caleb said, his hand briefly touching mine under the table. "Emily helps too. She's getting very good at measuring ingredients." "I can make pancakes all by myself," Emily announced proudly. "Daddy teaches me." Something flickered across Rachel's face at the word daddy, but she recovered quickly. "That's very impressive for someone your age." The rest of dinner passed smoothly, with conversation about Rachel's upcoming medical tests, updates on family members I'd never met, and Emily's school activities. Normal family conversation if you didn't count the subtle tension I couldn't quite identify. Tuesday and Wednesday followed the same pattern. Patricia and Rachel left early for medical appointments, returned in the afternoon tired and slightly anxious about test results, and we shared quiet dinners where everyone worked to maintain pleasant conversation. Emily was on her best behavior, using her inside voice, clearing her plate without being asked, and going to bed on time without the usual negotiations about just 5 more minutes of playtime. I was proud of how well she was handling the disruption to our routine, even as I noticed she seemed smaller somehow in the presence of these relatives who treated her with polite distance. Thursday morning brought news that Rachel's tests had been reassuring. Tension headaches, not the brain tumor she'd been quietly fearing, The relief in both women was obvious, and I felt my own shoulders relax as Patricia shared the good news over breakfast. We should celebrate, I suggested. Maybe go out to dinner tonight. There's a nice family restaurant downtown that Emily loves. That sounds wonderful, Patricia said. It would be nice to end the visit on a happy note. I made reservations at Romano's, a casual Italian place with excellent pizza and the kind of atmosphere that welcomed children without requiring them to sit perfectly still and quiet. Emily was excited about the prospect of dining out, especially somewhere that had crayons and paper placemats for drawing. Thursday evening, we dressed up slightly. Not formal, but nicer than our usual jeans and t-shirts. Emily wore a blue dress with pockets that she loved because she could carry important items like crayons and small toys. I chose a sweater that brought out my eyes and made me feel confident about representing our little family. We arrived at Romano's at 6:30, right in the heart of the dinner rush, but early enough to get a table without waiting. The hostess led us to a large booth in the back corner, exactly the kind of spot that gives families space to spread out and talk without disturbing other diners. Emily immediately claimed the crayons and began working on her placemat, occasionally asking how to spell words she wanted to include in her latest artistic creation. The conversation was lighter than it had been all week, buoyed by relief about Rachel's test results and the approaching end of what had been a successful, if careful, visit. That's when Emily made the mistake that changed everything. She was telling Patricia about her favorite teacher at school, enthusiastically describing a science project involving plants and sunlight, when she referred to Caleb as Daddy for the third or fourth time that evening. Rachel set down her water glass with enough force to make it clink against the table. "Emily," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge I'd never heard before, "you need to stop calling him that." The silence that followed Rachel's words was deafening. Every conversation in the restaurant seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Emily's crayon froze mid-stroke, her 7-year-old mind trying to process what she'd just heard. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Rachel straightened in her seat, her jaw set with the kind of determination that told me this wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was planned. She needs to understand that Caleb isn't really her father. She doesn't have our blood. She doesn't belong to this family. Patricia's face had gone pale, but she didn't contradict her daughter. She just stared at her hands, as if she could disappear into the tablecloth. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. My brave little girl just sat there, absorbing the cruelty of people who were supposed to love her, and I felt something break inside my chest. "How dare you?" I whispered. But before I could say more, Caleb held up a hand. He hadn't spoken since Rachel's attack began. He'd just sat there, staring at his sister with an expression I couldn't read. The silence stretched long enough for me to wonder if he was actually going to defend Emily, or if blood really was thicker than the family we'd built together. Then Caleb stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and somehow more intimidating than if he'd jumped up in anger. He placed his napkin on the table with careful precision, and when he looked at Rachel, his voice was calm as winter morning. "Then you're not my sister either." Rachel blinked, confusion replacing her righteous anger. "What?" "If blood is what makes family, Rachel, then you're not my sister, because you don't have our blood either." The color drained from Rachel's face completely. "Caleb, what are you talking about?" Patricia made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach, but Caleb kept his eyes fixed on Rachel. "You were 8 months old when Mom and Dad adopted you. Abandoned at the hospital, no identification, no family looking for you. They brought you home and never told you because they thought it would be easier that way. Have you ever experienced that moment when everything you thought you knew about someone suddenly rearranges itself? Drop a comment below if you've ever watched someone's entire worldview crumble in real time. You'll want to see how this plays out." Rachel's mouth opened and closed without sound. She looked at Patricia, whose tears were now flowing freely. "Mom?" Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. Patricia finally looked up, her face crumpled with decades of hidden guilt. "We were going to tell you when you were older, but then it never seemed like the right time, and you were so happy. And we thought—" "You thought what?" Rachel's voice cracked. "That I'd never figure it out? That it didn't matter?" "We thought it would hurt you," Patricia said helplessly. "You were our daughter. It didn't matter how you came to us." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I almost laughed, but Emily was still sitting there with tears on her cheeks, and this wasn't the time for dark humor about family hypocrites. "So let me get this straight," Caleb continued, his voice still that eerily calm tone that was somehow more devastating than shouting. "Emily doesn't belong in this family because she wasn't born into it. But you've been part of this family your entire life, despite not sharing our blood. Interesting logic." Rachel was shaking now, her hands pressed flat against the table as if she needed something solid to hold on to. That's different. How? Because they... She couldn't finish the sentence, probably because there was no way to finish it that didn't expose her own hypocrisy. Because you what, Rachel? Because you didn't know? Because you grew up thinking you belonged here? Because mom and dad chose you and loved you and made you their daughter regardless of genetics? Each question landed like a physical blow. Rachel flinched with every word. Kind of like how I chose Emily, Caleb said, finally turning to look at our daughter, who was watching this entire exchange with the wide-eyed attention of someone witnessing history. Like how Natalie and I chose each other, and how we chose to build a family based on love instead of DNA. I reached over and took Emily's hand, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, and I could see the confusion clearing from her eyes, replaced by something that looked like understanding. The difference, Caleb said, sitting back down and pulling Emily closer to him, is that Emily knows she's chosen. She knows she's wanted. She knows that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. He looked directly at Rachel. Something you've never quite figured out how to do. Rachel stood up so quickly her chair almost fell over. I don't have to listen to this. No, Caleb agreed. You don't. Just like we don't have to listen to you attack our daughter. She's not your daughter. Yes, she is. His voice was steady, absolute. She's been my daughter since the day I met her. The adoption papers just made it official. But even if they hadn't, even if there were no legal documents, even if she called me by my first name for the rest of her life, she would still be my daughter. Because that's what love does. It creates family. Emily looked up at Caleb with such pure adoration that I had to blink back tears. Are you really my daddy? Forever and always, kiddo. Nothing anyone says can change that. Rachel grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and desperate. This is ridiculous, I'm leaving. Good idea, I said, speaking for the first time since this whole confrontation began. My voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it. Emily, sweetheart, why don't you go wash your hands? Take your time. Emily slid out of the booth, still holding her crayon, and headed toward the bathroom. I waited until she was out of earshot before I turned back to Rachel. Let me be very clear about something, I said, my voice low enough that she had to lean in to hear me. If you ever, and I mean ever, speak to my daughter like that again, we're done. Not just you and me. You and Caleb. You and this entire family. You want to talk about blood? Emily is Caleb's daughter in every way that matters. And if you can't accept that, if you can't treat her with the same respect you'd want for yourself, then you can stay in your perfect little world 4 hours away and pretend we don't exist. Rachel's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. You can't keep us away from Caleb. He's our family. Watch me. Patricia finally found her voice. Please, let's not say things we can't take back. Oh, I can take it back, I said, still looking at Rachel. The question is whether Rachel is going to apologize to Emily and commit to treating her better, or whether she's going to keep acting like a child who just found out Santa Claus isn't real. Rachel looked at her mother, then at Caleb, then back at me. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. I thought she might recognize that her pain didn't justify hurting a 7-year-old. I thought she might remember that families are supposed to protect each other, not tear each other down. Instead, she turned around and walked out of the restaurant without another word. Patricia sat there staring at the empty space where Rachel had been, tears streaming down her face. I should go after her. Should you? I asked. Should you chase after someone who just emotionally abused your granddaughter? The word granddaughter hit Patricia like a slap. She looked at me with something that might have been surprise, as if she'd never considered that Emily was, in fact, her granddaughter by law and by love, regardless of genetics. I never meant for any of this to happen, she whispered. But you let it happen, Caleb said quietly. You sat there and let Rachel attack Emily, and you didn't say a word to stop it. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. How about that's enough, Rachel? How about Emily is part of this family? How about literally anything that would have protected a 7-year-old from being told she doesn't belong? Patricia's face crumpled further. You're right. I'm so sorry. Emily returned from the bathroom, her face washed and her hair smoothed down. She looked around the table, noting Rachel's absence without comment, and slid back into the booth next to Caleb. Did Aunt Rachel go home? She asked. She had to leave, Caleb said carefully. She was upset about some things. Emily nodded with the acceptance children show when adults fail to make sense. Are we still having dinner? I looked at our table full of untouched food and water glasses, at Patricia's tear-stained face, at the concerned glances from nearby diners who'd obviously witnessed at least part of our family drama. You know what? I said, signaling our waiter. Let's get this to go. I think we'd all be more comfortable eating at home. The drive back to our house was quiet. Patricia sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, while Emily chattered softly to Caleb about her drawing and whether we could have ice cream for dessert. Normal 7-year-old concerns, as if the last hour hadn't happened. But it had happened, and the effects were going to ripple through our family for a long time. Once we got home, I sent Emily upstairs to change into her pajamas while Caleb and I dealt with the takeout containers, and Patricia continued her impersonation of a woman in shock. "I need to call Rachel," Patricia said, pulling out her phone. "She shouldn't be driving when she's this upset." "She shouldn't have been attacking children when she was upset either," I pointed out. "But here we are." Patricia flinched. "She didn't mean it the way it sounded." "Didn't she?" Caleb asked, unpacking containers with more force than necessary. "Because it sounded like she meant exactly what she said. Emily doesn't belong because she doesn't share our DNA. Rachel's been struggling with some things lately. Her marriage isn't going well, and the health scare this week, and now finding out about being adopted." "Stop." I held up a hand. "Just stop. I understand that Rachel is dealing with difficult information. I understand that she's hurting. But none of that justifies what she did to Emily. None of it. You don't understand what it's like to find out your entire life has been built on a lie." "Actually," I said, my voice getting dangerously quiet again, "I understand exactly what it's like to have your entire life rearranged in one terrible moment. The difference is that when my world fell apart, I didn't take it out on innocent children." Patricia looked confused. "What do you mean?" I realized she didn't know about David. In all our careful conversations over the past few years, Caleb had apparently never mentioned that Emily's biological father was dead, that I'd been widowed and alone and building a life from scratch when I met her son. "Emily's father died when I was 2 months pregnant," I said simply. "Car accident. I raised Emily alone for 3 years before I met Caleb. So yes, I know what it's like to have your life completely destroyed and to have to rebuild everything from nothing. And I managed to do it without attacking children." The silence that followed was broken by Emily's voice from the kitchen doorway. "Daddy, can I have some juice?" She'd changed into her favorite pajamas, the ones with puppies on them, and was holding her stuffed elephant under one arm. She looked so small and innocent that my heart clenched. "Of course, sweetheart," Caleb said, moving toward the refrigerator. "Apple or orange?" "Apple, please." Emily climbed onto one of the kitchen stools and looked around at our tense faces. "Is everyone still sad about Aunt Rachel?" Patricia made a choking sound that might have been a sob. "We're working through some things," I said carefully. "Adult stuff that's not your responsibility to fix." Emily nodded solemnly. Sometimes grown-ups have feelings they don't know what to do with. The wisdom in that simple statement hung in the air. Here was a 7-year-old showing more emotional intelligence than the adults who'd just finished tearing each other apart. "That's exactly right," Caleb said, handing Emily her juice. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to use their words nicely. Like when I get frustrated with my homework and want to throw it. Exactly like that." Emily sipped her juice thoughtfully. "Except I'm not allowed to throw my homework, and grown-ups shouldn't be allowed to say mean things to kids." "You're absolutely right," Patricia said, speaking for the first time since we'd come home. "Grown-ups shouldn't say mean things to kids. Ever. And I'm sorry that happened to you, Emily." Emily considered this with the seriousness she brought to most adult apologies. "It's okay. I know Daddy loves me even if Aunt Rachel forgot for a little while." The simplicity of her forgiveness was devastating. She wasn't going to carry this wound forever, wasn't going to develop trust issues or abandonment fears. She was going to file it away as that time Aunt Rachel was confused about families, and move on with the confidence of a child who knows she's loved. I wished I could do the same. But I couldn't forget the look on Rachel's face when she delivered her poison. I couldn't forget Patricia's silence. I couldn't forget that if Caleb hadn't stood up for Emily, our daughter would have absorbed the message that she wasn't really part of our family. "Emily, finish your juice and then let's get ready for bed," I said. "It's been a long day. Can Daddy read stories tonight?" "Absolutely," Caleb said immediately. "Which book do you want?" As Emily launched into an explanation of her current favorite story, I caught Patricia's eye. She looked lost, uncertain, like someone who'd just realized she'd been reading the map upside down for years. "We need to talk," I said quietly. "After Emily's asleep." She nodded, understanding that the real conversation was just beginning. An hour later, Emily was tucked into bed with her usual collection of stuffed animals and her promise to try not to think too much about sad things. Caleb had read 3 stories and sung 2 songs, giving her the extra attention she needed after the evening's drama. Patricia, Caleb, and I sat in our living room with cups of coffee none of us really wanted, trying to figure out how to navigate the wreckage of family dinner. "I keep thinking I should call her," Patricia said, staring at her phone. She must be so confused and hurt. She hurt Emily, I said flatly. That's what matters right now. But she's my daughter too. Is she? The question came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't take it back. Because the woman who raised her would have taught her not to attack children. The woman who raised her would have stopped that conversation before it started. Patricia's face crumpled. I failed both of them tonight. Yes, Caleb said quietly. You did. His honesty was brutal, but necessary. Patricia needed to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a communication problem. This was a failure of basic human decency, and it had consequences. How do I fix this? She asked. I'm not sure you can, I said. At least not tonight. Rachel walked out of that restaurant without apologizing to Emily. She made her choice. She was shocked about the adoption. Stop making excuses for her. My patience had officially run out. I don't care how shocked she was. Emily didn't deserve to be collateral damage for Rachel's emotional crisis. Caleb reached over and took my hand, a gesture that was both supportive and cautionary. Heck knew I was close to saying things that couldn't be unsaid. Mom, he said carefully, I need you to understand something. Emily is my daughter. Not my stepdaughter, not my wife's kid that I tolerate. My daughter. And anyone who can't accept that, anyone who treats her as less than family, doesn't get to be part of our lives. Even Rachel? Especially Rachel. Patricia looked stricken. You'd cut off your sister over this? I'd cut off anyone over this. Emily is 7 years old. She doesn't get to defend herself when adults attack her. That's my job. That's Natalie's job. And if we don't do it, who will? The truth of that statement settled over us. Emily was just a child, dependent on the adults in her life to protect her from exactly the kind of cruelty Rachel had delivered tonight. I think, I said slowly, we need to take a break from family visits. Patricia's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean no more overnight stays, no more extended visits, no more putting Emily in situations where she might be attacked for existing. That's not fair. What's not fair is subjecting a 7-year-old to people who think her family status is up for debate. Caleb squeezed my hand. I agree. Until Rachel can acknowledge what she did wrong and commit to treating Emily with respect, we need distance. And if she never does? Then she never does, Caleb said simply. I'm not going to sacrifice my daughter's emotional safety for anyone, not even family. Patricia stared at us as if we were speaking a foreign language. But family forgives. Family works through problems together. Family also protects its most vulnerable members, I pointed out. Emily is 7. She's not equipped to work through problems with adults who think she doesn't belong here. Our job is to protect her, not to subject her to more abuse in the name of family unity. We sat in silence for several minutes, each of us processing what this meant for our family going forward. Patricia would have to choose between supporting Rachel's behavior and maintaining a relationship with Caleb and Emily. Rachel would have to decide whether her pride was more important than her relationship with her brother. But Emily would be safe. That was what mattered. I should probably go back to the hotel, Patricia said eventually. Give everyone time to think. That's probably best, Caleb agreed. I walked her to the door, because good manners had been drilled into me since childhood, even when people didn't deserve them. I really am sorry, Patricia said as she gathered her coat. About tonight. About not stopping Rachel. About all of it. I know you are. But Emily's the one who deserves the apology, and she's not getting one. Patricia nodded miserably. What do I tell Rachel when I see her? Tell her the truth. Tell her that attacking children has consequences. Tell her that if she wants to be part of this family, she needs to treat all of us with respect. And if she can't? I shrugged. Then she can't. Family isn't just about sharing DNA, Patricia. It's about showing up for each other. Rachel didn't show up for Emily tonight. She showed up for her own anger and her own pain, but not for a 7-year-old who needed protection. After Patricia left, Caleb and I cleaned up the kitchen in comfortable silence. The day's dishes, the takeout containers, the coffee cups, the mundane tasks that continue even after family explosions. How are you doing? He asked as I loaded the dishwasher. Furious, protective, grateful that you stood up for her. Of course I stood up for her. She's my daughter. I stopped loading dishes and looked at him. For a minute there, I wasn't sure you were going to say anything. I was waiting to see how far Rachel would go. I wanted to give her the chance to stop herself. And when she didn't, I reminded her that glass houses and stone throwing don't mix well together. I laughed despite everything. Your family's going to hate me for this. My family is you and Emily. Everyone else is optional. That night, as we got ready for bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily's response to the whole situation. Her confusion, her resilience, her matter-of-fact acceptance that sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean. "Do you think she'll be okay?" I asked Caleb. "She'll be better than okay. She knows she's loved. She knows she belongs here. That's more than a lot of kids have." He was right. Emily would be fine because she had something Rachel apparently hadn't had: the absolute certainty that her family chose her every day, not just once 7 years ago. What do you think should happen next? Should families cut ties to protect children, or should they keep trying to work things out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The next morning brought an unexpected text from Rachel at 6 a.m. "I'm sorry about last night. Can we talk?" I showed the message to Caleb while he made coffee, and we both stared at it like it might explode. "That's not an apology," I said. "That's a request for a conversation." Probably wants to explain why she was justified in attacking Emily. Or she wants to make sure we're not going to tell the whole family about their adoption. Caleb set down his coffee mug. Should I respond? I thought about it while watching Emily through the kitchen window. She was in the backyard, talking earnestly to our neighbor's cat through the fence, apparently filling him in on yesterday's drama. Completely fine, completely herself, completely unaware that adults were still processing her right to exist in this family. "Not yet," I said. "Let her sit with what she did for a while. Let her figure out how to make it right before we give her a platform to make excuses." But Rachel didn't wait for our response. She showed up at our front door at 10 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept and carrying a small gift bag that probably contained something she'd grabbed from a gas station on the way over. "I need to apologize," she said when I opened the door. "To Emily, and to both of you. I didn't invite her in immediately. Call it petty, but she'd earned the discomfort of standing on our porch while I decided whether she deserved access to our home." "What exactly are you apologizing for?" I asked. "For what I said at dinner. For hurting Emily's feelings. For—" She struggled with the words. "For being wrong about family." It wasn't a great apology, but it was a start. I stepped aside to let her in. Emily was in the living room, building an elaborate city out of blocks while having a complex conversation with her stuffed elephant about urban planning. She looked up when Rachel entered, her expression politely curious. "Hi, Aunt Rachel," she said. "Did you feel better after you left last night?" The innocence of the question hit Rachel like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might start crying right there in our living room. "I wanted to talk to you about what I said at dinner," Rachel began, sitting on the edge of our coffee table so she was at Emily's eye level. "I said something very wrong and I hurt your feelings." Emily considered this seriously. "You said I didn't belong in the family." "I did say that, and it was wrong. You absolutely belong in this family. You're Daddy's daughter, and that makes you my niece, and that makes us family forever." Emily nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Sometimes people say things when they're confused. "That's right. I was very confused about some things, but that doesn't make it okay for me to hurt you." "Are you not confused anymore?" Rachel glanced at me, then back at Emily. "I'm still confused about some things, but I'm not confused about you. You're family, and I should have remembered that." Emily returned to her block city, the crisis apparently resolved from her perspective. Rachel stood up, looking relieved and slightly surprised at how easily children can forgive when adults actually acknowledge their mistakes. "Can I talk to you and Caleb for a minute?" she asked me quietly. We moved to the kitchen, leaving Emily to her urban planning project. Caleb joined us, coffee in hand, expression carefully neutral. "I owe you both an apology too," Rachel said. "What I said was inexcusable. I was shocked about the adoption news and I took it out on Emily, and that was completely wrong." "It was," Caleb agreed, "but I'm more interested in understanding why you thought it was okay to attack a 7-year-old in the first place." Rachel's face flushed. "I didn't think it was okay, I was angry." "About what?" "About finding out I was adopted. About Mom and Dad lying to me my whole life. About feeling like everything I thought I knew about myself was wrong. And that justified hurting Emily how?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "It didn't. There's no justification. I was in pain, and I wanted someone else to hurt too. And Emily was—" She paused, searching for words. "An easy target?" I suggested coldly. "Safe," Rachel admitted. "She was safe to hurt because she's just a kid and couldn't fight back." The honesty was brutal, but it was honest. She'd attacked Emily because Emily couldn't defend herself, because taking out her pain on adults might have had consequences. "That's exactly why we can't let this happen again," Caleb said quietly. "Emily trusts us to protect her. If we don't, who will?" "I understand. I'm not asking you to forget this happened or pretend it was okay. I'm just asking for the chance to do better." I studied Rachel's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus damage control. She looked exhausted, deflated, like someone who'd spent the night confronting some uncomfortable truths about herself. "What does doing better look like?" I asked. "Treating Emily like she belongs here because she does. Not making her pay for my problems. Remembering that she's 7 and deserves to feel safe with family." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it acknowledged the actual harm she'd caused rather than focusing on her own pain. Progress. "And if you get upset about something else, if you have another crisis or another shock, then I deal with it like a grown-up instead of taking it out on children." Caleb leaned against the counter, still watching his sister with careful attention. "Why should we believe you?" "Because I don't want to lose you. Or Emily. Or this family that I apparently didn't appreciate enough." There was something raw in her voice that suggested she'd spent the night calculating exactly what her cruelty might cost her. Losing her brother, losing her place in the family she'd just learned wasn't biologically hers, losing the niece she'd attacked for the same reason. "One more incident," I said quietly. "One more attack on Emily. One more moment of taking your problems out on our daughter, and we're done. Not timeout, not cooling off period. Done." Rachel nodded quickly. "I understand. I'm serious, Rachel. Emily's emotional safety isn't negotiable. Not for anyone. I get it. Really. I won't hurt her again." We stood there in awkward silence, none of us quite sure how to move forward from this point. The apology had been offered and conditionally accepted, but trust would take time to rebuild. "I should probably go," Rachel said. "Let you guys get back to your day." "Actually," Emily's voice came from the kitchen doorway, "do you want to see my city? I'm building a place where all different kinds of families can live together." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love to see your city." As they walked back to the living room together, Emily chattering about her architectural plans, Caleb and I exchanged glances. "Think she means it?" I asked quietly. "I think she's scared enough to mean it, at least for now. And if she doesn't, then we do exactly what you said. We're done." I nodded, feeling the weight of protecting Emily settle back onto my shoulders. It was a weight I'd carry gladly for the rest of my life, but I was tired of having to protect her from people who should have been protecting her themselves. Family shouldn't be this hard. But then again, the family we'd built, Caleb, Emily, and me, had never been hard. It was everyone else who complicated things. The rest of Rachel's visit passed quietly. She left Sunday morning with promises to stay in touch and do better, and a hug for Emily that seemed genuine rather than performative. Patricia had barely spoken since the restaurant incident, clearly struggling with the revelation about Rachel's adoption and her own failure to protect Emily. For 2 weeks afterward, our house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't during the visit. Emily went back to her normal routine. Caleb and I fell into our comfortable rhythm, and life moved forward without family drama. Then the phone calls started. First, it was Patricia, wanting to check in and make sure everyone was moving past what had happened. Then Rachel, sending awkward texts about Emily's school activities that she couldn't possibly know about unless she was checking our social media obsessively. "They're performing guilt," I told Caleb after the 3rd call that week. "Acting like concerned family members now that they realize there might be consequences for treating Emily badly. Should I tell them to back off? Not yet. Let them prove whether this is real change or just damage control." The answer came 3 weeks later, during Emily's school play. Emily had landed the role of a sunflower in her 2nd grade production of The Garden of Learning, which involved exactly the kind of elaborate costume and enthusiastic overacting that makes parents cry with pride and embarrassment in equal measure. Caleb and I arrived early to get good seats, cameras ready to document every moment of Emily's theatrical debut. She'd been practicing her one line, "I grow tall with knowledge," for weeks, complete with arm gestures that represented reaching toward the sun. Halfway through the first act, I spotted familiar faces in the back of the auditorium. Patricia and Rachel, looking uncomfortable and overdressed for an elementary school cafeteria, scanning the crowd for us. "Did you know they were coming?" I whispered to Caleb. He shook his head, his expression darkening. "They didn't ask permission to be here." Emily's class took the stage for their big number. 23 second graders dressed as various plants and flowers, singing about photosynthesis with the kind of earnest enthusiasm that makes you question whether you've ever been that purely happy about anything. Emily was in the front row, her sunflower costume slightly crooked, but her smile brilliant as she delivered her line with perfect timing and maximum drama. She spotted us in the audience and waved enthusiastically, nearly losing her balance but recovering with the natural grace of a 7-year-old who's never met a stage she didn't own. After the performance, we made our way backstage to collect our little actress, who was still buzzing with excitement and already asking when she could audition for the next school play. "You were perfect," I told her, helping her out of the bulky sunflower costume. "Best sunflower in the history of sunflowers." "Did you see me remember my line? And did you see when Tommy forgot his and I whispered it to him?" "We saw everything. You were amazing." "Daddy, did you get pictures?" "About 100. Caleb said, showing her the camera screen. "We'll make an album just for your first play." "Emily!" We turned to see Patricia and Rachel approaching. Patricia carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked expensive and out of place in the elementary school setting. Emily brightened at the sight of them. "Grandma Pat! Aunt Rachel! You came to see my play!" "We wouldn't miss it," Patricia said, though her smile looked strained. "You were wonderful, sweetheart." Rachel handed Emily a small gift bag. "For the best sunflower we've ever seen." Emily opened the bag to reveal a charm bracelet with a tiny sunflower charm. "It's beautiful, thank you." As Emily showed off her bracelet to anyone within earshot, I cornered Patricia. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting our granddaughter. She told Caleb about the play when we talked last week." "She told you because Caleb shares family news with you. That doesn't mean you were invited to attend." Patricia's face flushed. "We're her family. We should be at important events. You're her family when it's convenient for you. When it's hard, when someone attacks her, you're nowhere to be found. That's not fair, isn't it? Where were you when Rachel was telling Emily she didn't belong? Where was your voice when your granddaughter needed protection?" Before Patricia could answer, Emily bounced over with her bracelet, chattering about how she was going to wear it to school tomorrow to show her teacher. I watched Rachel's face as Emily talked, looking for signs of genuine affection versus performative grandparent behavior. Rachel seemed more relaxed than she had during their visit, smiling and asking follow-up questions about Emily's costume and her favorite part of the performance. Maybe the apology had been real. Maybe she was actually trying to do better. Or maybe she was just better at hiding her resentment now that she understood the consequences. "Can we take you out for ice cream?" Patricia asked. "To celebrate Emily's theatrical debut?" Emily looked at me hopefully. Ice cream was always a yes in her world, and she was still riding the high of her performance success. "Please, Mommy, I want to tell them about all the other plays I'm going to be in." I caught Caleb's eye. He shrugged slightly, leaving the decision to me. "Okay," I said. "But just for an hour. It's a school night." The ice cream shop was crowded with other families who'd had the same post-performance celebration idea. Emily chose a table near the window and launched into a detailed recap of every moment of the play, including behind-the-scenes drama involving costume malfunctions and forgotten lines. Patricia and Rachel listened attentively, asking appropriate questions and laughing at Emily's dramatic reenactments. Normal grandparent behavior. The kind of attention Emily deserved from family members who claimed to love her. "I'm going to be in every play until I graduate," Emily announced, swirling her spoon in her strawberry ice cream. "And then I'm going to be in plays on real stages with real lights." "That sounds like an excellent plan," Rachel said. "We'll have to make sure we don't miss any of them." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. There was a wistfulness there, a sadness that seemed genuine rather than manipulative. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly while Emily described her future Broadway career to Patricia. Rachel's smile was sad. "Just thinking about all the things I almost lost by being stupid." "Almost? You could still change your mind. Decide I'm too much trouble to deal with. Cut me out of Emily's life." The vulnerability in her voice was unexpected. This was a different Rachel from the one who'd attacked Emily at the restaurant, different from the one who'd delivered careful apologies focused on minimizing consequences. "That was never what we wanted," I said carefully. "We just wanted Emily to be safe." "I know, and I want that too. I want to be the kind of aunt she deserves, not the kind who hurts her when I'm having a bad day." "That's what we want too." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Emily entertain Patricia with increasingly elaborate plans for her theatrical career. Maybe this could work. Maybe Rachel had actually learned something from nearly destroying her relationship with her brother. Maybe family dinners didn't have to be minefields where Emily's right to exist was up for debate. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. And Emily's safety would always be my first priority, regardless of how much Rachel claimed to have changed. Some things, once said, can't be unsaid. Some wounds, once inflicted, leave permanent scars. But people can change, can grow, can choose to be better versions of themselves. I hoped Rachel was one of those people. For Emily's sake, and for the family we were all trying to build together. 6 months later, we hosted Thanksgiving at our house for the first time. It was Emily's idea, actually. She wanted to make a gratitude feast where everyone could share what they were thankful for, And somehow that evolved into inviting Caleb's family for the holiday. "Are you sure about this?" Caleb asked as we planned the menu. "It's a lot of pressure, hosting your first major holiday. Emily wants her whole family here, and honestly, I want to see if we can do this. Have a normal family gathering where everyone actually acts like family." Rachel had been consistently better since the school play incident. She called regularly to talk to Emily, remembered important events, and sent appropriate gifts that showed she was actually paying attention to our daughter's interests. She'd even started therapy, which she'd mentioned casually during one of our phone calls. Patricia had been more reserved, still processing her own guilt about the restaurant incident and the adoption revelation, but she'd made an effort to connect with Emily, sending cards and small gifts, asking about school activities with genuine interest. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke up nervous but excited. Emily had been talking about this dinner for weeks, planning what she wanted to say during the gratitude sharing, helping me choose which recipes to make. "I want everything to be perfect," she announced while helping me set the table with our good dishes. "It doesn't have to be perfect, sweetheart, it just has to be nice. But I want Grandma Pat and Aunt Rachel to see that we're a real family." The comment stopped me cold. "What do you mean, a real family?" Emily arranged napkins with careful precision. "You know, like that we belong together. That I belong with you and Daddy." 7-year-olds shouldn't have to prove they belong in their own families. The fact that Emily was still thinking about this, still feeling the need to demonstrate her place in our lives, made my heart ache. "Emily, look at me." I knelt down to her level. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You belong here because this is your home, because Daddy and I love you, because you're our daughter. Not because you can set a perfect table or say the right things at dinner. I know, but I want them to love me too. They do love you. And if they don't show it the way you deserve, that's their problem, not yours." Patricia and Rachel arrived precisely at 3 p.m., carrying flowers and wine and the kind of nervous energy that suggested they'd spent the drive discussing how to navigate this family gathering without stepping on any landmines. Emily greeted them with her usual enthusiasm, showing off her Thanksgiving dress and explaining the elaborate place cards she'd made for everyone. Normal grandparent-granddaughter interaction, warm and easy in a way that made me cautiously optimistic about the day ahead. Dinner conversation was surprisingly smooth. We talked about Emily's school activities, Caleb's latest renovation projects, Rachel's new therapy insights, Patricia's book club, normal family topics, no mention of adoption or belonging or who had the right to be at our table. When it came time for gratitude sharing, Emily went first. "I'm grateful for my family," she said solemnly. "For Mommy and Daddy, who love me always, and for Grandma Pat and Aunt Rachel, who came to see my play and who are here for Thanksgiving dinner." Her simple statement hung in the air like a gift. No drama, no qualifications, just a 7-year-old grateful for the people around her table. Patricia went next, her voice slightly shaky. "I'm grateful for second chances, for the opportunity to be a better grandmother than I've been, and for Emily, who forgives more easily than adults deserve." Rachel's gratitude was more complex. "I'm grateful for learning that family isn't about blood or perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I'm grateful that this family didn't give up on me when I forgot how to show up properly." Caleb's turn was simple but powerful. "I'm grateful for love that chooses to stay, for a wife who makes me better, for a daughter who makes every day brighter, and for family that's willing to grow and change together." When it was my turn, I looked around the table at these people who'd become our family through choice and commitment and sometimes painful growth. "I'm grateful for chosen family," I said, "for people who see your worth and decide to love you anyway, for second chances and difficult conversations and the courage to protect what matters most." After dinner, Emily convinced Rachel to help her build a fort out of couch cushions while Patricia and I cleaned up in the kitchen. Normal post-holiday chaos, the kind of comfortable disorder that happens when people actually enjoy being together. "Thank you," Patricia said quietly as we loaded the dishwasher, "for inviting us, for giving us another chance. Thank you for taking it seriously, for doing the work to earn it." Rachel's been in therapy since that awful dinner, working on her anger and her fear of abandonment. She never wants to hurt Emily like that again. I hope that's true. It is. She knows how close she came to losing all of you, and it scared her enough to actually change. We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the sounds of Emily's laughter drifting in from the living room, where she was directing Rachel in proper fort construction techniques. "She's going to be fine, isn't she?" Patricia asked. "Emily, I mean, despite everything that happened." I looked toward the living room, where Emily was explaining complex architectural principles to 2 adults who were taking her instructions very seriously. "More than fine. She's going to be extraordinary." Because she knows she's loved, she knows she belongs here, and she knows that family fights for each other when it matters. That night, after Patricia and Rachel had gone back to their hotel and Emily was asleep, Caleb and I sat in our living room surrounded by the comfortable aftermath of successful hosting. "How do you think it went?" he asked. "Better than I expected. Good enough to try again? Think they've actually changed?" I considered the question while picking up Emily's scattered fort-building supplies. I think they're trying to change, which is more than they were doing 6 months ago. And if they backslide, then we handle it. But Emily deserves the chance to have grandparents and aunts who love her properly. If they can figure out how to do that, I want to give them the opportunity. Caleb pulled me down onto the couch beside him. "You know what I realized today?" "What?" "We did it. We built something real. A family that can handle conflict and come through it stronger. A family that protects its most vulnerable members. A family that chooses love over convenience." He was right. We had done it. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but we'd created something worth fighting for. Emily was safe, loved, and confident in her place in our world. Rachel was learning to be better. Patricia was finding ways to show up appropriately. And Caleb and I were more united than ever, having proven to ourselves and everyone else that our family was unshakable when it mattered most. 6 months ago, Rachel had tried to tell Emily she didn't belong. Tonight, Emily had thanked her for being part of the family. The transformation wasn't magic. It was the hard work of people committed to loving each other better. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or grand gestures. This one ends with what real life usually offers: slow growth, careful rebuilding, and the quiet satisfaction of protecting what matters most. Emily belongs here. She's always belonged here. And now everyone knows it, including the people who forgot for a while, but found their way back to treating her with the love she deserves. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real stories about family, love, and fighting for what matters most. Sometimes the most powerful victories aren't dramatic. They're just people choosing to show up better for the ones they love.